The Hunting Party, Linkin Park's sixth studio album, which did a full 180 from their previous, more electronic-sounding records. To the surprise of absolutely everyone, in 2014, Linkin Park dropped a heavy metal album with elements of rap and screamo. My opinions on The Hunting Party and its songs have jumped around a lot since I first heard it, so let's go ahead and get into it. Coming in last place is Mark the Graves. I think this is one of the most universally disliked Linkin Park songs outside of the One More Light album. What could have been an awesome metal track turned to an incohesive pile of mess. The verses feel super out of place and the chorus is just difficult to listen to. The instrumental sections with the heavier guitar and drums are actually pretty good. I would have been very happy if Mark the Graves were instead an instrumental track to replace Drawbar or something like that. The only part of this song with vocals that I actually like is the end where Chester is screaming. That's it. Overall, this is one of Linkin Park's worst pieces for sure. I almost always skip it while listening to the album. I think you all expected Drawbar to be at or near the bottom of this list. It's an instrumental track, which gives me very little to talk about. It's probably the weakest of all Linkin Park's instrumental tracks that aren't just short interludes. Drawbar feels somewhat empty, even for an instrumental. It seems like the band just wanted another feature in Tom Morello to give some undeserved credit to another boring song from this album. While I do understand its placement before Final Masquerade, I still wish it were more climactic and meaningful to the album. War is probably one of the most hated Linkin Park songs, at least judging by all the comments I've seen about it online. I don't think all the intense hate is warranted, but I'm not huge a fan of this track either. It feels overly aggressive, which does fit the theme, but I don't think it works either way. The entire song is basically Chester screaming about how war is bad, blah blah blah. Like, the instrumentals admittedly are pretty good, but the lyrics and their shallowness really ruin the song. War is the Hunting Party's version of Victimized from the previous album, Living Things, being short and packed with energy, but Victimized was far better in my opinion. War is pretty underrated, but it's still not that great. I don't really skip it ever, but it doesn't make me feel anything like most of the songs from this album do. Wastelands is one of the singles from the Hunting Party, and I'd say it's the weakest among those singles. Even then, it's a respectable track which combines energy from both this album and the previous one to form an instrumentally metal and vocally more catchy and mainstream sound. The guitars are a bit underwhelming throughout most of the track, which is what keeps Wastelands from moving up, but the vocals make up for it somewhat. Chester's screaming feels very in place and that it's lighter to fit with the more mainstream hook of the chorus. Mike's rapping is solid, as usual, and the lighter guitar in the verses, while a bit odd, kind of works. Wastelands to me always felt like a heavier and more metal version of a song from Living Things. Like it was originally a more electronic sounding and pop focused track from Living Things, which was scrapped and transformed to fit the vibe of the Hunting Party. The biggest stain on this song is the bridge. It feels very out of place and a little difficult to listen to. Other than that, though, the rest of the song is solid, nothing really special, but it's a nice listen most of the time. Keys to the Kingdom is another one of the most hated Linkin Park songs based on what I've seen from the people. The main complaint is that it's too screamy, which, yes, but I actually think it works in a way. This is the first track on the album, and I think it's funny that after the generally more electronic and mainstream Living Things, the first thing that first-time Hunting Party listeners hear is Chester screaming, "No control, no surprise." In my opinion, the first verse is the part that brings the song down. If I were listening to this album for the first time, hoping for a heavy metal comeback, I would probably be really upset if I heard Mike soft singing the first verse after getting my hopes up in the intro. The second verse, though, which is rapping, is a big improvement over the first, but it still doesn't hit nearly as hard as most of his rapping from the previous albums. I think the virtually total absence of Joe Hahn's DJing in this track, and others on the album for that matter, really hurts the potential of the rapping. The bridge, though, is my favorite part, acting as a very climactic transition between the last two choruses. The vocals during the guitar solo are also awesome, and the lead into the final chorus is nice. I also think the final few seconds where Chester is screaming, "I'm my own casualty," was a nice addition. With a little more cohesion, I think Keys to the Kingdom could have been at least number 5 or 6 on this list. Until It's Gone is another one of the singles from this album. It builds on the famous old saying, "You don't know what you've got until it's gone." It was very difficult to decide whether to put this above or below Final Masquerade, so just know these next two may flip-flop over time. Until It's Gone expands upon the theme of cherishing what you have and making the most of it before you lose it. My favorite line has to be, "I've heard it said 1,000 times, but now I know." It's like the person singing brushed off the saying for their whole life, and is just now realizing that it was true the whole time. It's basic, but I really just like that line. Where this song is better than previous entries, it's a very well executed combination of rock and pop. The chorus and vocals in general are for the most part much softer than most of the other tracks on the album. I mean, of course, it's a single, but Until It's Gone holds the right amount of subtle rock, especially in the chorus. I also like the smaller details in the chorus like the bells, slower drums, and electronic sounds in the background. My favorite part would have to be the end because it's the only screaming in the song, but the quality is very consistent throughout. Final Masquerade is, if I'm not mistaken, the biggest hit from the Hunting Party. The song deviates quite a bit from the metal style most of the album uses, opting for a much softer and mainstream sound. The only big similarity between this song and the metal style is the heavier drums. Linkin Park usually was never super heavy on the drums in their earlier albums, but the Hunting Party generally has much heavier drums. This track still has that, and the lighter guitar melodies feel similar to Drawbar, which was the interlude right before this. As for the vocals, they're nice, nothing too special. They fit the atmosphere well. The hook is great, and the second chorus and on feels very climactic and epic, like the final send-off for the album. Not exactly, but I'll get to that in a minute. I like the theme of the song, revealing your secrets or taking off the mask to someone else after a series of broken trust, because it's not worth it to just keep lying about everything. The lyrics are very powerful. This idea of taking off the mask is something that we all wish more people did, especially in the age of social media, where everybody wears a mask in some way. The energy that goes along with these lyrics is done pretty much perfectly. Linkin Park is historically very good at not doing too much, with a few exceptions. Final Masquerade is a very pleasant listen. It's not heavy, and it doesn't need to be. In conclusion, this is one of the most iconic songs from the Post Minutes to Midnight era, and I think it holds its own fairly well. All for Nothing is the second track on the Hunting Party. I like its placement right after Keys of the Kingdom, assuring fans that there's more rap to come. This song has my favorite rapping from Mike on this album. Parts feel very similar to Wretches and Kings, which was my favorite song from A Thousand Suns. You can feel the confidence in his voice, especially in the lines like, "I'm a 5-star general infantry controller." That line is funny to me, but it works. All for Nothing, more than any other track from this album, found the sweet spot of rock, rap, and singing. Chester takes a backseat here, only appearing in moments of the chorus and not as the primary vocalist. As much as I love Chester, and I prefer him overall, the more mic-heavy tracks like this and Wretches and Kings are the most effective at radiating this confident energy. My favorite part is the second verse for the reason I just mentioned. The lyrics aren't super deep or anything, but everything just sounds good here. The more controlled guitars sound great. Paige Hamilton was a great feature. The vocals are the perfect balance of soft from Mike and heavy from Chester. Everything gels together amazingly, and I always enjoy listening to this song. Coming in at number 3 is Rebellion. I actually had this placed at number 2 for a while, but over time it lost its replay value a bit, so it's here now. Darren Malakian is my second favorite artist feature on this album behind Requiem, and I must say he did an amazing job, especially in the intro and the bridge. The heavier and more fast-paced and urgent guitar from him really creates the energy that makes this song special. Similarly to All for Nothing, all the different elements feel very cohesive, and none of them are too overpowering, well, except for the screaming, but in that case it's a good thing. I think the theme of this track is very well suited to its sound and progression, mostly in the bridge. There's an initial spark of possible rebellion with the guitar in the intro, which then gets put down and built back up throughout the rest of the runtime until the bridge, where there's actually a rebellion with the screaming, obviously. The Hunting Party has a lot of political or internationally weighted statements, this being one of them. We, in America in this case, are very fortunate to live in a place without many overly oppressive government laws and regulations, as most people in most of the world do. Musically, though, the chorus isn't particularly strong. Again, Rebellion is pretty heavily carried by Darren's guitar and Chester's screaming in the bridge. Speaking of the bridge, I like the build-up to the screaming within the bridge itself, with the subtle guitar and more apparent electronic sounds going on in the background. Then the screaming is amazing, of course. The outro is also nice with some subtle screaming at the end, which is hard to catch, but it's there. Overall, Rebellion is a very good addition to the Hunting Party, and its status as a single is well-deserved in my opinion. A Line in the Sand, in my opinion, one of Linkin Park's most underappreciated songs. It's the closing track for the Hunting Party, and I must say, it's gotta be my favorite album closer from all 7 of the band's albums. A Line in the Sand feels almost like a second attempt at Mark the Graves, where every element is about 10 times better. While I would usually not be a fan of the slow opening with just emptiness for a while and then Mike softly singing, I think the progression right afterwards with a heavier guitar and drums is done absolutely flawlessly. The build-up aspect of the song is without a doubt the best on the album, maybe even Linkin Park's entire discography. Progression within songs is something Linkin Park has always been really amazing at, and I think all their experience from past albums perfectly culminated to make this. Despite the verses being boring, they need to be that way for the chorus to reach its full potential. The chorus itself, man, just awesome. The transition between the soft singing right into the heavier half singing, half screaming from Chester is always super satisfying to listen to. One thing that I feel like a lot of the songs in this album do is have the first verse be singing and the second verse be rapping. This is one of those times. The rapping in the second has slightly more energy than the singing from the first, which fits perfectly because it's like some of the energy from the preceding chorus is still there in the second verse. I love the transition between that verse and the second chorus, when the time comes calling, yeah, you are gonna get yours, from Mike. It's a great lead into the chorus, which is basically someone finally facing consequences for their deception. Then comes my second favorite part of the song, the bridge. That may be surprising since it's just instrumental, but the combination of the guitar and the drums is just incredible. The bridge has breakdown energy, which is great because breakdowns tend to be my absolute favorite thing in music when they're done right. My favorite part though is the repeated screaming at about 5.5 minutes in. The guitar is going crazy in the background, the drums are pounding harder than Will Smith at the Oscars. Everything about this section is just amazing. At 5 minutes and 50 seconds, the song could have ended, but instead Mike comes back to sing the intro again, which I surprisingly really like. Just the fact that the track goes for full circle, starting and ending in the same way is really cool to me. I love when songs, namely album closers, have sort of dual endings, especially when it's a heavy ending versus a soft ending. Some great examples of this are Rise and Fall and Everglow by Starset, two amazing album closers which I talked about in more detail in my Starset video if you're interested. The Hunting Party takes this dual ending idea a step further, however. Final Masquerade, the previous track in order, also would have been an effective album closer, certainly not as good as this, but it has that album closer energy to it. My favorite thing about the Hunting Party, other than the number one song, is the way that it ends. Final Masquerade feels like the normal ending, an iconic piece to send off a great record, but A Line in the Sand to me acts as a hidden outro, like the second phase of a boss in a video game that you weren't expecting, like Giratina from Legends Arceus. If you've ever listened to the Black Parade album, My Chemical Romance, you may know about the hidden track called Blood. On the actual physical album, like the record, there's a few minutes of silence in between the supposed closer, Famous Last Words, and the hidden track Blood. Sadly, Blood is one of MCR's worst songs, but I still think the idea of a hidden track is really cool. The only thing that could have made the ending of A Hunting Party better is if A Line in the Sand were a hidden track like Blood, or a few minutes of silence between it and Final Masquerade on the album. Sorry for the rant, but I just really love this ending. One of the best done of any album ever in my opinion. I'm extremely excited to talk about this track. Guilty All the Same is a song that got me to listen to The Hunting Party for the first time. I first heard it just listening to an auto-generated YouTube mix, and was immediately hooked. Rakim is featured in the bridge, which is definitely my favorite guest artist moment from this album, and I guess all of Linkin Park's music for that matter. I won't go into nearly as much detail on the lyrics of the song, since the message is pretty obvious. Record labels and the music industry in general are corrupt and are just trying to get as much money as they can by any means necessary, even if that means compromising the purity of the music that their artists make. I am, however, going to dive deep into the musical elements. The first minute and a half of the runtime is just instrumental, which would usually get boring, but the frequent progression with heavier and lighter sections alternating continuously makes it better. There are a lot of points in this song where the instrumentals go in a different direction than you might expect. For example, the beginning of the first chorus. The drums right beforehand hint at a heavier chorus, which does eventually happen, but the beginning of the chorus catches you off guard initially. It's like Chester did a little hezzy to throw off his defender, and then goes in to score the easy layup. Guilty All the Same has undoubtedly one of the album's best choruses. It has the same energy as A Line in the Sand, angry half singing, half screaming, which Chester does an amazing job of executing. The second verse and chorus are more of the same, except the second chorus is immediately heavy as opposed to stalling it for the sake of progression. My favorite part though, what else would it be but the bridge? Rakim is featured here, and the absolute skill this man has to rhyme words is unfathomable. For an entire minute straight, he made every single line rhyme with either guilty or same. That takes some serious skill, especially with guilty. The last few lines of the bridge are probably my favorite. Greedy for the fame, TV or a name, media the game, to me you're all the same, you're guilty. That sounds just amazing, goes well with the drums and the subtle guitar. The final chorus is the climax of the song, bringing everything together to create one of the best moments on the entire album. After that is the screamy outro, which is nice, and then 30 seconds of straight guitar and drum masterclass. Guilty All the Same is one of the best songs of the 2010s, easily top 20. I think Linkin Park really left their mark with these top two tracks as a band that's legitimately capable of doing metal and combining other elements with it, such as rap and screaming. I absolutely love this song, one of my top 30 favorites of all time. It and A Line in the Sand really saved this album, as they're the only two real standouts. That was my personal ranking of Linkin Park's The Hunting Party. The Hunting Party is obviously a much more metal-focused record compared to even the early new metal style ones the band created, and I personally like their take on metal with rapping and Chester screaming. This album, I would say, is somewhere near the middle of my album rankings. I'm not totally sure about it, but you'll be able to see my official rankings of the albums themselves in my upcoming video where I rank the albums worst to best. I hope you enjoyed listening to me ranting about one of my favorite bands for a few minutes. If you did and would like to see more music-related content from me in the future, please consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like on the video. I put a list of bands I want to make videos on in the future in the description, so maybe check that out if you're interested. Even if you're only interested in Linkin Park, I have 2 more videos planned to come out soon about just Linkin Park. Again, if you have some spare time and want to share your own rankings of this album, you're welcome to drop it in the comment section. I always love seeing your own opinions on this awesome music. With that said, thanks for watching and have a nice day, guys.